What is going on, everyone? Chris with Journals, Comics, and Pop Culture. This video today is discussing a very hot comic topic, discussing graded books and the saturation of graded books on the market. We're going to dive into some very important questions that the community is asking. Now, this is my April Patreon exclusive suggestion video. So this topic is being brought to you by patron and friend of the channel, Tricky Clicky. Tricky, thank you so much for submitting this question. Before we get into the video, if you are subscribed to the channel, guys, please take the time to do so and check out all the awesome links below, including how you can become a Patreon member for only $3.99 a month. And you can also join and become a YouTube channel member for only $1.99 a month. Now, I want to give a special shout out to my YouTube channel members because, and I say this, I take as much money as I can from all my memberships and I put it back into my channel. And this last month, from my earnings from my YouTube members, I bought a tacking iron. Yes, that's right. So thanks to you all, I'm upping my grading, my grading stand, or excuse me, not my grading, my pressing abilities. So look out for a video. I'm going to obviously get used to it, do some trial and error with the tacking iron on some books. But, I always make pressing videos. I try to make at least 2 or 3 a year. And yeah, I'm very happy to finally have a tacking iron, and I'm going to include this in my next video. So be on the lookout for that. So again, thank you all so much for supporting the channel. All right, let's get into this topic of discussion, everyone. I'm going to read Tricky's question, and then we're really going to go from there. Again, this is not scripted at all. I'm coming from the heart, giving you guys my perspective on this topic. All right, Tricky asked, what do you think will happen to the market when it gets flooded with graded books everywhere? Will this drive the slab prices down? And will raw book values increase because everyone wants to find raw books and submit them for grading? Wow, what a question. I love this question. Okay, these are the things that we need to put on the table before I answer the question. All right, we need to look at the grading industry. And this is something that I say all the time. The grading industry is still in its infancy. It's only been around for about 20 years, right? So think about it. Think about a book that's a key book, right? Whether it's a Silver Age book or a Bronze Age book or even, more of a modern book, anywhere from an Amazing Fantasy 15 to a Hulk 181 to an Amazing Spider-Man 300 to an Ultimate Fallout 4. And you look at print run, right? You look at how many maybe are available out there. How many high grades, how many mid grades, how many low grades. And you take into the consideration how many people are getting their hands on these books and sending them off to CGC. So there's no more books of these issues being printed, right? They're done. They were printed in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. And more people are getting their hands on them, though, and sending them to CGC or CBCS or PGX or EGS. So the amount of books that are out there on the market is staying the same, or maybe even shrinking, right? Because maybe they're getting thrown away, they're getting worn down, and still read and not taken care of properly. But you get more that are graded and more that are graded and more on the census. So what can this do? Well, obviously, keeping it more black and white. For those people that want graded books, this can have an effect that can essentially lower value. Because when you talk about supply and demand, especially with comic books, it's not just the comic book anymore. There's so many variables, right? There's the grade itself. Well, how many high grades are on the market? And so what's the supply of this book in high grade? And what's the demand of that high grade copy? Next to, like, say, just the demand of a low grade or a mid grade. And then you got the demand for graded books, right? Which is a specific supply and demand. And then you got the demand for a specific grade of a book, say 9.8s. So let's look at the market right now. And yes, there has been a boom in demand for 9.8 graded books. A boom. Supply can't keep up with the demand right now. That's why you're seeing 9.8s increase exponentially in value across the board with so many books. Now, of course, there's high demand in the market right now in general. People are wanting to buy comic books. People are wanting to buy keys. This is driving prices up all over the board. You know, raw books, graded books, high grade, mid grade, so forth. But let's look at specifically those 9.8s. What if the response of hundreds or thousands of people that have these books in high grades, and they want to go submit their books now to try to get that 9.8? This is how it would affect the market. First off, those people submitting the books to CGC have to want to be able to sell that book. If they're wanting to submit their books to CGC and there's more on the census now, but they're getting those books back in a slab and they're keeping them in their personal collection, then that does nothing to supply. Because I talk about this a lot as well. Supply doesn't equate to what's on the census when it comes to graded books. Supply doesn't equate to print run alone. Supply equates specifically to the amount available on the market at any given time. So, again, I'll repeat myself. If people are rushing their books off to CGC or CBCS or whatnot to get them graded, but they're keeping them in their own personal collection, it does nothing to the value of the book on the market if the supply and demand on the market at that point in time does not change. But it does change and affect it if more and more people are sending them to get those grades simply to put them back onto the secondary market. And my answer to this question, Tricky, is it really all depends on the amount of supply versus the amount of the demand, and it comes down to basic economics. If the demand of a CGC 9.8 Ultimate Fallout 4 or 9.6 Amazing Spider-Man 300, if the supply over exceeds the demand, the value of that book is going to drop. But to a bigger part of your question, do I think that's going to happen industry-wide when it comes to more and more books being graded? I don't think so. Because you got to look at it like this. I talk about ebb and flow. Yes, ebb and flow. Right now, with certain books, because of the high demand, specifically for 9.8, especially with more modern books, because there's going to be more that can land that 9.8 graded slab grade, right? You could see an ebb and flow here. Right now, you could see a specific book that's hitting record sales in a 9.8. Like I said, especially more modern books. You could see them maybe start to cool off if so many people start rushing their books and getting 9.8s on the market. All right, because then maybe supply starts exceeding demand, and that drops the price down a little bit. But is anything like this going to crash the value of any of these books? I don't think so whatsoever. And I also don't think it's going to have a negative effect long term. Because simply, supply and demand changes constantly. There's influx constantly. So again, you look at ASM 300 specifically, and you look at what that's doing on the market, not just in 9.8, but in high grades or even mid grades at this point. You know, you got 6.0 CGC selling for what, you know, your 9.6s were selling for a couple years ago. If there's an influx on the market and it cools the prices down a little bit, what's going to happen is that more and more people are going to be buying those off the secondary market to own and to hold in their personal collection. And regardless of certain loud individuals right now that are out there talking, saying, oh, you know, nobody's, you know, it's all speculators and all this, people are holding their books. New collectors are coming into the hobby. New money is coming into the hobby. And it's not just flippers and speculators and investors. People are coming in and buying key books and holding them long term. So let's review it again. And we're using to make Spider-Man 300 as an example. Right now, influx of demand. Oh my gosh. There's not enough supply to keep up with demand. But sellers are getting hit to that demand, and they're going to be sending their books to CGC, and we're going to be getting more on the market. And we might have a point to where it does this, and it brings the value down, right? But I'm telling you, once people start taking those books, they're buying them and they're taking those books off the market and they're holding them in their personal collection, demand is going to keep going up, and the supply is going to start to go back down again. I guarantee it. For your standard blue chip keys, even for more modern books, that's the ebb and flow of how this is going to happen, which means ultimately, long term, you're going to see the values of these books continue to increase. All right. Now, Tricky also brought up, what does this mean for raw books? If the graded books start oversaturating the market, is it going to make the raw books more in high demand? Well, look, this is what I talked about earlier on. I said, you're talking about two different products on the market. An ASM 300 that's slabbed is a different product than ASM 300 raw, right? So you got to simply look at the supply and demand for each product because they're different. I just talked about what's going to happen with the graded supply and demand, ebb and flow, but long term, I still think demand is going to outweigh supply because there's still a finite supply of slabbed or raw books, right? So the same thing is going to happen with raw books. Now, again, certain periods in time, you might see more people pulling away of selling raw books and then selling graded books, slab books, so that's going to make less raw books available on the market, right? So essentially, if there's less raw books available on the market for those buyers that are wanting to demand the raw book, that could drive the price up as well. But it's never, in my humble opinion, going to drive a raw book price is never going to be driven past a graded price, because it's the same thing that we see happening today, right? Anytime a graded book in a certain grade that's slabbed goes up, it's going to make the demand for the raw book go up for the most part anyways. Now, I said you can have blips. You can have blips happen where maybe in a matter of 48 hours or something, you get an influx of graded books and buyers wanting to just focus on these graded books, and you might be able to get a raw copy of that book for a decent deal because in that specific time, maybe the demand went to the raw books and something got overlooked. I've seen this happen on eBay a lot, where I came up on raw books or a certain book that was possibly being overlooked for whatever reason. That's just the way the market works. Nothing is set in stone and etched in stone. So I don't see an oversaturation of graded books making a raw book this rare entity now that's, there's like X amount, there's thousands of graded high grades, and now there's only a few raw high grades, so somehow that's going to make us jump to this raw as if it's something more important than the graded one. I don't see that happening whatsoever at all, because like I said, the demand for these books is always going to be there for the most part for raw and for graded, and they're going to ride the same type of market flow that we've been seeing for the last 20 years, ever since grading companies came into play. Now, the only way that I think the future of the grading industry is going to hurt the market and maybe drive values of graded books down and drive the value of the raw books up is if the public perception of the slabbed book, of the certified graded book, becomes so negative, right, that nobody wants to buy them anymore. And although I really don't think that's ever going to happen. And even though CGC has a million flaws, and every other company out there, it's a grading company, is not without flaw. The industry itself is highly flawed. I've talked about this a lot. I think the lack of transparency in the grading industry is a huge detriment. I think a lot of what CGC is doing right now is a huge detriment. But I am optimistic, and I do feel that the grading industry is going to evolve in the right direction. But if it doesn't, just say hypothetically, if it doesn't, and it comes to a point to where collectors and even flippers and investors and people that just, they go and get their books slabbed simply because they want that top dollar on the secondary market. If those numbers, and I got my EGS here. Shout out to Caleb for winning this. I got to send it off to him. But if this number right here, this grade given, whether it's CGC or CBCS or EGS or PGX or whatever, if people start seeing more and more that this grade is invalid, that this grade means nothing because of the lack of transparency, because of the lack of consistency, if it comes a day where there's a large majority of folks that stop believing in that number, then we have a problem. Because then you're going to have a bunch of books that are sitting in a nice plastic case that are going to lose the demand that was there for so long. So, for a seller standpoint, it might be best for you to crack that slab and to sell it raw. That is the only way that I feel the value of these graded books are going to really crash, so to say, or it'll or the value of these graded books will be nothing because the demand for the raw books is gonna overshadow the graded books. That's the only way, and quite honestly, I don't think that's gonna happen ever. I don't. Even if CGC one day isn't on top anymore, as an industry as a whole, I don't see that happening. So I would say, to sum this video up and to sum this question up, the bottom line is this. As the amount of books that are being graded continues to increase, the demand is right there increasing as well. I mean, look at me. I'm a person that owns over 18,000 books, and I'm not huge on grading and slab books. I'm not. I will never be somebody that wants to slab random books just to get a 9.8, or somebody that's spending a whole bunch of money just to have my books in a plastic case with a grade number on it. But over the last few years, I started submitting books off to get graded, but a select few. So even I who enjoys raw books so much, have started buying into the graded book, but only to a little bit, and I'll probably stay that for the rest of my life, right? Unless I start really selling and then I feel that I can get value for certain books, more value graded than raw, then I'll be sending more books in that way, but who knows if that'll ever happen. But the demand for graded books continues to increase, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. I always say this, most of us collectors are hybrids. There's a little bit of investor in us, there's a little bit of speculator in us, there's a little bit of hoarder in us, there's a little bit of reader in us, there's a little bit of the individual that collects the art in us. And there might be a little bit of seller in a lot of us as well, and there might be a little bit of wanting that graded book in us as well. And I think that hybrid model of a collector is continuing to grow as well. And I hear, like myself, I hear a lot of people that said, oh, I'll never grade a book, I'll never own a graded book, that are now, oh, I'm going to spend a little money on getting a few books graded. Or maybe if I can find a good deal, I'm going to buy that book in a CGC grade or a CBCS instead of looking for that raw book. So I think the market overall is still going to remain healthy. The value of these books are still going to remain healthy and increase. We might see some ebb and flow, specific to the book, specific to the grade, and specific to the time period, and looking at what the supply versus demand is at any given moment on the market. So that's my video for today. Tricky, I hope I answered this question and touched on this topic in a way that really gave you the insight that you were looking for. If you're watching this, let me know your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your response. And of course, anyone else, let me hear your thoughts below. If you have any questions, I would love to continue this conversation because I feel it is a very, very awesome conversation to have. So with that being said, thank you all again so much for watching. Please, if you aren't subscribed to the channel, take some time to do so. Take some time to do so. I'm looking to hit 7,000 subs by the end of this month, and I am already got the gears going in my head, planning for my next contest, which would be a 10,000 subscriber contest. But again, big shout out to all my Patreon members and my YouTube channel members for continuing to support me and the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. Be well, and until next time.